The tiny blue blanket still smelled like lavender. Mira Ashwood hated that. 3 years should have been enough. 3 years should have erased the scent. 3 years should have dulled the memories. 3 years should have made it easier to breathe. Instead, every full moon she found herself sitting beside the same window, holding the same blanket, mourning the same child. Outside, Blackthorn Kingdom celebrated the Harvest Moon Festival. Music drifted through the village. Children laughed. Families gathered around bonfires. The entire kingdom felt alive. Meanwhile, Mira sat alone, as always. The blanket rested in her lap, small, soft, painful. The silver wolf stitched into one corner had begun to fade from age. Not because it was old, because she touched it too often. The blanket had been made for her son, a son who never took a breath. A son who never opened his eyes, a son who never came home, or so she believed. A single tear landed on the fabric. Mira quickly wiped it away. Not because she was ashamed, because she was tired. Tired of crying, tired of grieving, tired of remembering. 3 years ago she had been the happiest woman in Blackthorn. Mate to Alpha King, Rowan Blackthorn. Future Luna. Mother of the kingdom's future heir. Then, one terrible night destroyed everything. The labor lasted nearly 18 hours. The pain never seemed to end. The healer whispered encouragement. Servants rushed in and out. Storms battered the castle walls. And when it was finally over, silence. No cry, no laughter, no celebration, only silence. Then came the words she still heard in nightmares. I'm sorry. Nothing else. Just those 2 words. The healer never needed to explain. Mira understood immediately. Her son was gone, dead before she could hold him. Dead before she could love him. Dead before he could know she existed. The blanket trembled in her hands. Because tonight wasn't simply another festival. Tonight would have been his 3rd birthday. A sharp knock suddenly echoed through the cottage. Mira frowned. Nobody visited anymore. Not this late. The knock came again, louder, more urgent. She folded the blanket carefully, placed it inside the wooden chest beneath her bed, then crossed the room. The moment she opened the door, cold air rushed inside. A young warrior stood waiting, breathing hard, covered in dirt. Anxiety filled his face. The sight immediately made Mira uneasy. What happened? The warrior swallowed, then looked over his shoulder, as though making sure nobody followed him. Finally, he spoke. Your brother sent me. Mira's stomach tightened. To Elias. Nothing. The warrior shook his head quickly. He's fine. A pause. At least I think he is. Mira's uneasiness grew. What does that mean? The young wolf hesitated, then whispered, We found something. Silence. Mira stared. The warrior looked uncomfortable. Nervous. Almost frightened. Then he added, A grave. The word seemed harmless. Yet something about the way he said it made the air inside the cottage feel colder. A grave. The warrior nodded. Deep in the northern forest. Another pause. Then came the sentence that changed everything. It has the royal crest on it. The world stopped. Mira blinked. Surely she misheard. The royal crest belonged to the Blackthorn bloodline, the Alpha King's family. No royal pup had died recently. No royal burial existed in the northern forest. None. Then the warrior lowered his voice. And there's something else. Mira's pulse quickened. What? The young wolf looked directly into her eyes. The date. Silence. The grave is 3 years old. The room seemed to tilt. 3 years. Exactly 3 years. The same amount of time since her son died. No, it was coincidence. It had to be. Thousands of wolves died every year. Thousands. Yet suddenly, the blanket hidden beneath her bed felt heavier. Then the warrior spoke again. Elias asked me to bring you immediately. Mira grabbed her cloak without another word. Because for the first time in 3 years, something felt wrong about the night her son died, and somewhere deep inside her chest, a terrible thought was beginning to wake. Before we continue, subscribe and turn on notifications if you enjoy emotional werewolf stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and unforgettable reunions. And tell us in the comments, if you discovered someone had stolen years of your child's life, would you ever forgive them? Now let's return to the night. A forgotten grave threatened to expose a lie, buried for 3 years. The northern forest stood silent beneath moonlight. Ancient pines stretched toward the sky. Mist drifted between the trees. The deeper Mira traveled, the more uneasy she became. The journey should have taken comfort from familiarity. Instead, it felt like walking toward a nightmare. When she finally reached the clearing, 6 warriors stood waiting. Among them was Elias, her older brother. The one person who never abandoned her after the tragedy. The moment he saw her, relief crossed his face. Then concern quickly replaced it. Mira. She approached immediately. What happened? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the center of the clearing, toward a small patch of disturbed earth. Mira followed his gaze and froze. A tiny headstone stood among the roots of an old pine tree, weathered, cracked, forgotten. Yet even from several feet away, she recognized the symbol carved into its surface. A silver wolf crest, the blackthorn royal crest. Her heartbeat quickened. Slowly, she moved closer. One step, then another, until she finally reached the grave. The inscription had nearly disappeared. Years of rain and snow had worn most of it away, yet enough remained to read. And the moment Mira saw the date, her blood ran cold. 3 years ago. Exactly 3 years ago. The same month. The same week. The same night. The night her son supposedly died. No. The word escaped before she realized it. Elias looked at her. Concern filled his eyes. Mira. No. This time stronger. More desperate. Because coincidence was becoming harder to believe. Then Elias reached into his satchel. Slowly, carefully, as though handling something fragile, something dangerous. When he finally opened his hand, moonlight reflected off silver. A bracelet, tiny, beautiful, made for a newborn pup. Mira stopped breathing, because engraved on the inside was a single name, Aaron. Aaron. The bracelet slipped from Mira's fingers. It hit the ground. Neither she nor Elias moved. For several seconds the forest seemed frozen. The wind stopped. The trees stopped. The world stopped. Because only 3 people had ever known that name. Mira, Rowan, and the healer who delivered the child. Nobody else. Nobody. Then a memory surfaced. 3 years earlier. A warm summer evening. Rowan sitting beside her on the balcony overlooking Blackthorn. His hand resting against her stomach. The baby kicking beneath his palm. What should we call him? He'd asked. Mira smiled despite herself. We don't even know if it's a boy. It feels like a boy. That's not how that works. It does. She remembered laughing. The memory hurt, because she hadn't laughed like that in years. Then Rowan had pointed toward the stars. Aaron. The name came from nowhere, yet both of them immediately loved it. Aaron. Strong, simple, perfect. The memory vanished. The forest returned. The bracelet remained in the dirt. Real. Impossible. Terrifying. Then Mira slowly knelt. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Moonlight reflected across the silver surface. Aaron. The letters remained clear despite the years. Then she noticed something else. A scratch. Tiny. Almost invisible. Yet she recognized it immediately. Her throat tightened. Because she'd made that scratch herself. 3 years ago, while teasing Rowan. He'd left the bracelet on a table. She'd accidentally knocked a sewing needle across the silver. The mark remained forever. A tiny imperfection, a tiny memory, a tiny piece of proof. The bracelet belonged to her son. Not a similar bracelet, not a coincidence. His. Silence filled the clearing. Then Elias asked the question neither wanted to hear. How? Mira couldn't answer. Because she didn't know. Nothing made sense. If the bracelet belonged to Aaron, why was it buried here? If the grave belonged to Aaron, why had she never seen it? If Aaron was buried here, then who had been buried in the royal cemetery? Her stomach twisted. Then another realization struck. She had never actually seen the burial. Not properly. At the time she'd been exhausted, broken, barely conscious. The healers handled everything. The funeral happened quickly, too quickly. She remembered asking to see him one last time. The healer refused, claiming the body had deteriorated, claiming it would only cause more pain. At the time she'd believed her. Now the memory felt wrong, very wrong. Then one of the warriors spoke. "There's more." Everyone turned. The young wolf pointed toward the grave, near the base of the headstone, half hidden beneath roots. Mira crouched, carefully brushed away dirt, and found a second object, a small wooden wolf, hand-carved, worn by age. The sight stole her breath, because she recognized it immediately. Rowan had carved it. She watched him make it. The Alpha King wasn't a skilled craftsman, far from it. One ear was slightly larger than the other. The tail leaned sideways. The carving was imperfect, which made it unmistakable. This had once belonged inside the nursery, inside the castle, inside their son's room. Then a horrifying possibility entered Mira's mind. If both items belonged to Aaron, then the grave wasn't random. Someone intentionally connected it to her child. Someone wanted it hidden. The question was why, and who? Miles away, Alpha King Rowan Blackthorn stood alone inside the royal training yard. Steel clashed around him. Warriors sparred. Orders echoed. Yet the king barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on a wooden carving in his hand. A wolf. Small. Poorly made. One ear slightly crooked. The second matching carving. The first had disappeared 3 years ago. The memory suddenly returned. He'd made 2. One for the nursery, one for Aaron's first birthday. The second vanished shortly after the funeral. At the time, he assumed a servant misplaced it. Now he wasn't so sure. Then Captain Varric approached. The old warrior bowed slightly. "My king." Rowan looked up. "What is it?" Varric hesitated, then answered carefully. "Mira was seen leaving the village." The king frowned. "Where?" "The northern forest." Silence. The answer felt insignificant. Yet something about it bothered him. The northern forest. The same forest where hunters recently reported strange activity. The same forest where old burial sites occasionally surfaced after storms. Then Varec continued. She wasn't alone. Another pause. Elias was with her. Rowan's unease deepened. Because Mira rarely left the village. Not anymore. Not after the tragedy. Then another memory surfaced. The funeral. 3 years ago. A closed coffin. A grieving healer. A grieving mother. A grieving father. And one detail that suddenly felt strange. The coffin had remained closed the entire time. At the time, nobody questioned it. Now he couldn't stop thinking about it. Then Rowan looked toward the eastern horizon. A cold feeling settled into his chest. The same feeling he'd carried since the day Aaron died. Something unfinished, something unresolved, something wrong. Back in the forest, the warriors began searching the surrounding area, quietly. The deeper they searched, the stranger things became. No family markings, no clan symbols, no signs explaining who buried the grave. Nothing. Then a voice called out from deeper among the trees. "Elias!" The warriors immediately moved toward the sound. Mira followed, heart pounding. Moments later, they entered a second clearing and found another discovery. A marker. Not a grave. A trail marker. Old, nearly hidden by moss, yet carved into the wood was the same symbol found on the headstone, the silver wolf crest. Someone had used the royal crest repeatedly. Not once, repeatedly, deliberately. Then Elias examined the ground. His expression changed instantly. "What is it?" The older wolf pointed toward the dirt. Footprints. Small footprints. Not recent. Years old, yet preserved beneath exposed tree roots. Mira stared. The prints belonged to a child, a very young child. The silence swept through the clearing. Then Elias slowly looked at her. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Because they were both thinking the same thing. If a child had once been here, then perhaps a child had once left here too. And for the first time since finding the grave, hope entered the story. Small, fragile, dangerous hope, the kind capable of saving a person or destroying them completely. Then one of the warriors emerged from the trees carrying something wrapped in cloth. His face had gone pale. "Elias," the older wolf turned. "What is it?" The warrior swallowed, then carefully unfolded the cloth. Inside rested a faded royal birth record, half destroyed by weather, half preserved, just enough to read. And the moment Mira saw the first line, her knees nearly gave out, because written across the top of the document were 5 words, Royal Heir Birth Registry, and beneath it, a name, Aaron Blackthorn. Aaron. The bracelet slipped from Mira's fingers. It hit the ground. Neither she nor Elias moved. For several seconds the forest seemed frozen. The wind stopped. The trees stopped. The world stopped. Because only 3 people had ever known that name. Mira, Rowan, and the healer who delivered the child. Nobody else. Nobody. Then a memory surfaced. 3 years earlier. A warm summer evening. Rowan sitting beside her on the balcony overlooking Blackthorn, his hand resting against her stomach, the baby kicking beneath his palm. "What should we call him?" he'd asked. Mira smiled despite herself. "We don't even know if it's a boy. It feels like a boy. That's not how that works." "It does." She remembered laughing. The memory hurt, because she hadn't laughed like that in years. Then Rowan had pointed toward the stars. Aaron. The name came from nowhere, yet both of them immediately loved it. Aaron. Strong, simple, perfect. The memory vanished. The forest returned. The bracelet remained in the dirt. Real, impossible, terrifying. Then Mira slowly knelt. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Moonlight reflected across the silver surface. Aaron. The letters remained clear despite the years. Then she noticed something else. A scratch. Tiny, almost invisible, yet she recognized it immediately. Her throat tightened, because she'd made that scratch herself, 3 years ago, while teasing Rowan. He'd left the bracelet on a table. She'd accidentally knocked a sewing needle across the silver. The mark remained forever. A tiny imperfection, a tiny memory, a tiny piece of proof. The bracelet belonged to her son. Not a similar bracelet, not a coincidence. His. Silence filled the clearing. Then Elias asked the question neither wanted to hear. How? Mira couldn't answer, because she didn't know. Nothing made sense. If the bracelet belonged to Aaron, why was it buried here? If the grave belonged to Aaron, why had she never seen it? If Aaron was buried here, then who had been buried in the royal cemetery? Her stomach twisted. Then another realization struck. She had never actually seen the burial. Not properly. At the time she'd been exhausted, broken, barely conscious. The healers handled everything. The funeral happened quickly, too quickly. She remembered asking to see him one last time. The healer refused, claiming the body had deteriorated, claiming it would only cause more pain. At the time she'd believed her. Now the memory felt wrong, very wrong. Then one of the warriors spoke. "There's more." Everyone turned. The young wolf pointed toward the grave, near the base of the headstone, half hidden beneath roots. Mira crouched, carefully brushed away dirt, and found a second object. A small wooden wolf, hand-carved, worn by age. The sight stole her breath, because she recognized it immediately. Rowan had carved it. She watched him make it. The Alpha King wasn't a skilled craftsman. Far from it. One ear was slightly larger than the other. The tail leaned sideways. The carving was imperfect, which made it unmistakable. This had once belonged inside the nursery, inside the castle, inside their son's room. Then a horrifying possibility entered Mira's mind. If both items belonged to Aaron, then the grave wasn't random. Someone intentionally connected it to her child. Someone wanted it hidden. The question was why, and who? Miles away, Alpha King Rowan Blackthorn stood alone inside the royal training yard. Steel clashed around him. Warriors sparred. Orders echoed. Yet the king barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on a wooden carving in his hand. A wolf. Small. Poorly made. One ear slightly crooked. The second matching carving. The first had disappeared 3 years ago. The memory suddenly returned. He'd made 2. One for the nursery, one for Aaron's first birthday. The second vanished shortly after the funeral. At the time, he assumed a servant misplaced it. Now he wasn't so sure. Then Captain Varric approached. The old warrior bowed slightly. "My king." Rowan looked up. "What is it?" Varric hesitated, then answered carefully. Mira was seen leaving the village. The king frowned. "Where?" "The northern forest." Silence. The answer felt insignificant. Yet something about it bothered him. The northern forest. The same forest where hunters recently reported strange activity. The same forest where old burial sites occasionally surfaced after storms. Then Varric continued. She wasn't alone. Another pause. Ilias was with her. Rowan's unease deepened. Because Mira rarely left the village. Not anymore. Not after the tragedy. Then another memory surfaced. The funeral. 3 years ago. A closed coffin. A grieving healer. A grieving mother. A grieving father. And one detail that suddenly felt strange. The coffin had remained closed the entire time. At the time, nobody questioned it. Now he couldn't stop thinking about it. Then Rowan looked toward the eastern horizon. A cold feeling settled into his chest. The same feeling he'd carried since the day Aaron died. Something unfinished. Something unresolved. Something wrong. Back in the forest, the warriors began searching the surrounding area. Quietly, methodically. The deeper they searched, the stranger things became. No family markings, no clan symbols, no signs explaining who buried the grave. Nothing. Then a voice called out from deeper among the trees. "Elias." The warriors immediately moved toward the sound. Mira followed, heart pounding. Moments later, they entered a second clearing and found another discovery. A marker. Not a grave. A trail marker. Old. Nearly hidden by moss. Yet carved into the wood was the same symbol found on the headstone. The silver wolf crest. Someone had used the royal crest repeatedly. Not once. Repeatedly. Deliberately. Then Elias examined the ground. His expression changed instantly. "What is it?" The older wolf pointed toward the dirt. Footprints. Small footprints. Not recent. Years old. Yet preserved beneath exposed tree roots. Mira stared. The prints belonged to a child. A very young child. Silence swept through the clearing. Then Elias slowly looked at her. Neither spoke. Neither needed to, because they were both thinking the same thing. If a child had once been here, then perhaps a child had once left here too, and for the first time since finding the grave, hope entered the story. Small, fragile, dangerous hope, the kind capable of saving a person or destroying them completely. Then one of the warriors emerged from the trees, carrying something wrapped in cloth. His face had gone pale. "Elias." The older wolf turned. "What is it?" The warrior swallowed, then carefully unfolded the cloth. Inside rested a faded royal birth record, half destroyed by weather, half preserved, just enough to read, and the moment Mira saw the first line, her knees nearly gave out, because written across the top of the document were 5 words, Royal Heir Birth Registry, and beneath it, a name, Aaron Blackthorne, Ilara. The name struck Damon like a physical blow. For a moment, he simply stood there, unable to move, unable to think, unable to breathe. The healer was dead. She was supposed to be dead, not literally, but practically, gone, hidden, forgotten. That had been the agreement. 3 years of silence, 3 years without contact, 3 years without mistakes. Now she was standing outside his door. Everything was unraveling. Then Damon dismissed the guard. Bring her in. The moment the guard left, the prince poured another glass of wine. His hands were shaking. That frightened him more than anything else, because Damon Blackthorne never shook, never. Then the chamber door opened, and Ilara entered, older, thinner, more tired, yet unmistakably alive. The healer stopped several feet away. Neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy, dangerous. Then Damon finally broke it. You're supposed to be hiding. Ilara laughed. A sad laugh. The kind people make when they no longer fear consequences. 3 years. Silence. I hid for 3 years. The prince looked away, because she was right. Then Ilara stepped closer. You told me nobody would get hurt. The accusation landed immediately. Damon's jaw tightened. I believed that. The healer stared at him. Disbelief filled her eyes. You stole a child. Silence. You destroyed a family. Another. You buried a lie and called it mercy. The prince flinched. Not visibly, yet enough. Then Ilara whispered, I watched her mourn. The words hurt more than they should have, because Damon remembered. Every festival, every birthday, every anniversary. Mira sitting alone. Rowan growing quieter. The kingdom grieving a child who wasn't dead. The prince closed his eyes, because for 3 years he'd told himself the same thing. It was necessary. 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 Yet the word felt weaker every year. Then Ilara reached into her cloak, removed a folded document, and placed it on the table. Damon immediately recognized it. His blood ran cold. The original birth record. The complete one. Not the altered copy. Not the version stored in the archives. The original. The real one. Then Ilara spoke, quietly, dangerously. Mira found the grave. Silence. The prince stared at the document, then at the healer, then back again. Everything was moving too fast. Then he asked, how much does she know? Ilara's answer came immediately. Enough. The prince swallowed, because enough was often all it took. Then the healer added something unexpected. She doesn't suspect Rowan. Damon looked up sharply. What? Ilara nodded. Not yet. Relief appeared, tiny, brief, then disappeared again, because the next sentence was worse. She suspects you. The room fell silent. The prince didn't react, didn't move, didn't speak. Yet internally, everything cracked, because Mira was intelligent, persistent. And once she started looking for answers, she rarely stopped. Then Ilara whispered, you need to tell them. Damon laughed bitterly. The sound echoed through the chamber. Tell them what? The healer stared. The truth. Silence. The prince looked toward the window, toward the kingdom sleeping beneath moonlight. Then quietly said, the truth won't save anyone. Ilara frowned. What does that mean? The prince didn't answer immediately, because some secrets were worse than the lie itself. Then finally he spoke. The child wasn't taken because of inheritance. The healer froze. Silence. Then she slowly shook her head. No. Damon nodded. Yes. Another pause. There was another man in the birthing room. The healer went pale, immediately, because she remembered. The stranger, the one standing outside the doorway during the storm, the one who vanished. Then Damon continued. He knew things. Another pause. He knew the child's name. Another. He knew the mark would appear. The healer's breathing quickened, because she remembered that too. The crescent mark, the strange symbol, the impossible eyes. Then Damon whispered, he told me the child would be hunted. Silence. He told me keeping Aaron in Blackthorn would get him killed. The healer stared, trying to decide whether he was lying. Then she realized something. The prince believed every word, even now. 3 years later. Then Ilara quietly asked, who was he? The answer came like a curse. The Moonseer. Silence. The healer stepped backward. Because every wolf knew the stories. The wandering prophet, the collector of bloodlines, the man who appeared before disasters. Most believed he was a myth. Damon never did. Then the prince looked toward the birth record, toward the proof of everything, and whispered, I thought I was saving him. The words sounded pathetic, weak, yet heartbreakingly sincere. Then Ilara asked the question neither wanted to answer. And where is Aaron now? Silence. The prince's face darkened, because that was the real problem, not the lie, not the theft, not the cover-up. The problem was what happened afterward. Then Damon whispered, I don't know. The healer stared. What do you mean you don't know? The prince laughed again, broken, exhausted, haunted, because this was the truth he'd hidden from everyone, even himself. Then he finally said it. The man I paid disappeared. Silence. He vanished with the child. Another. I never saw him again. The room froze, because suddenly the story became much worse. Aaron wasn't hidden. Aaron was lost. Then, a terrible realization crossed Ilara's face. If the child survived, nobody controlled where he was. Nobody knew who raised him. Nobody knew what he'd become. And nobody knew whether he was coming back. Then another knock echoed through the chamber. Hard, urgent. The prince frowned. The interruption felt wrong, dangerous. Then the door burst open before anyone could answer. A royal messenger stumbled inside, breathing hard, face pale, terrified. The moment Damon saw him, his stomach dropped, because messengers only looked like that when kingdoms were about to change. The young wolf struggled for breath, then blurted out the words, My prince. Silence. We found another one. The room froze. Damon stared. Ilara stared. Neither understood. Then the messenger swallowed and whispered, Another grave. The healer's face went white, because suddenly one hidden grave was becoming two, and that meant somebody had been leaving a trail. Another grave. The words echoed through the chamber. Damon stared at the messenger, then at Ilara, then back again, because there should not have been another grave. One hidden grave was already impossible. Two meant someone was creating them intentionally. Then Damon spoke. Where? The messenger swallowed. The eastern ridge. Silence. The same royal crest. Another pause. The same date. The prince felt the room spinning, because suddenly the problem wasn't a buried secret. It was a message. Someone was revealing the truth, piece by piece. The question was why, and who. At sunrise, Mira stood beside the second grave. This one looked newer, not recently buried, recently uncovered. The storm that passed through the eastern ridge had torn away roots and soil, exposing something hidden beneath. The grave itself matched the first almost perfectly. Same royal crest, same weathered stone, same date. Yet this one contained something else. A box, small, wooden, buried beneath the marker. The moment the warriors uncovered it, silence spread through the ridge. Because boxes hidden inside graves rarely contained anything good. Then Elias carefully opened the lid. Mira stopped breathing. Inside rested dozens of folded papers. Letters, old letters, protected by wax cloth, preserved for years. The first page sat on top, addressed to no one, signed by no one. Then Mira unfolded it. The handwriting belonged to a stranger, yet the words immediately stole her breath. Day 14. The child survived the journey. Silence. Every wolf around her froze. Mira read it again, then again, then again. The child survived the journey. Not died, not buried, survived. The word shattered 3 years of certainty. Then she unfolded another letter. One, a breathing one. Then another letter. Day 73. The mark has appeared again. I do not understand what he is. The air left Mira's lungs. The papers slipped from her fingers, because every letter described the same child. A child hidden after birth. A child transported somewhere far away. A child who should not have existed. Her child. Then Elias grabbed another page. The older wolf scanned the writing. His face immediately darkened. "What?" Mira asked. He handed her the paper. Her eyes moved across the words, then stopped. The final line had been written with unusual force, as though the writer feared someone would eventually read it. If anything happens to me, tell the Alpha King his son lives. Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because there it was. Proof. Not suspicion. Not hope. Not possibility. Proof. Aaron had lived. At least for several months. Maybe longer. Then Mira broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Her knees simply gave out. The weight of 3 stolen years finally became too much. Because grief had been terrible. But grief with hope attached? That was worse. Far worse. Then a hand appeared beside her. Elias. Her brother. Steady. Reliable. Present. The older wolf helped her stand. Then quietly asked, "What do you want to do?" The answer came immediately, without hesitation, without doubt. "I want the truth." Silence. Then Mira looked toward Blackthorn Keep, toward the castle, toward the Alpha King, toward the man who had mourned beside her. Then she whispered, "All of it." Meanwhile, Rowan Blackthorn was already riding toward the eastern ridge. The moment reports of the second grave reached him, something changed. The unease he'd felt for days became certainty. Something was wrong with Aaron's death. Very wrong. The Alpha rode alone. Ignoring protocol, ignoring guards, ignoring advice. His instincts were screaming, and for years he'd ignored them. Not this time. Then another memory surfaced. One he'd buried, the night of the funeral. Damon insisting everything be handled quickly. Damon organizing the ceremony. Damon speaking to the healers. Damon managing details Rowan never questioned. Because he trusted him. Because he was family. The realization tasted bitter. Then the king's horse crested the ridge, and Rowan saw them. Mira, Elias, the warriors, the grave, the box, the letters. The moment Mira looked up and saw him, everything changed. Because she wasn't looking at him the way she had for 3 years. Not with grief, not with distance, not with resignation. She was looking at him with something else. Hope. Terrifying hope. Then she held up one of the letters. The Alpha frowned. "What is that?" Silence swept across the ridge. Then Mira spoke, her voice shaking, her eyes wet, her heart breaking all over again. "It's from the man who took Aaron." The world stopped. The horse stopped. The wind stopped. Everything stopped. Then Rowan slowly dismounted, because suddenly, every nightmare he'd survived for 3 years was becoming something worse. A possibility. The king took the letter. Read the first line, then the second, then the third. His hands began shaking, for the first time in years. Then he reached the sentence. The child survived the journey. Rowan stared, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to move. Then he looked toward Mira. And for the first time since the night they lost their son, the same impossible thought entered both their minds. What if Aaron never died? And somewhere far beyond Blackthorn Kingdom, a young wolf with silver eyes was already running toward the destiny that had been chasing him since birth. The first thing Rowan did was lock the letters away. The second thing he did was read them again, and again, and again. By sunrise, he had memorized every word, every line, every detail, every clue. Because fathers do strange things when hope returns. 3 years ago, grief destroyed him. Now hope was threatening to do the same. The letters covered the council table. Mira sat beside him. Elias stood nearby. Captain Varric remained silent in the corner. Nobody slept. Nobody wanted to. The first letter confirmed Aaron survived. The second confirmed he traveled east. The third described strange changes. Silver eyes, unusual strength, the mark appearing beneath moonlight. The fourth letter ended abruptly. No explanation, no farewell, no final destination, just silence, as though the writer vanished. Then Elias pointed toward a sentence. He writes the same phrase repeatedly. Rowan looked. The older wolf was right. One location appeared several times. Shadowpine. The name surfaced in 6 different letters. A remote territory beyond Blackthorn borders, far enough to disappear, far enough to hide a child. Then Mira whispered, "That's where we start." Silence followed. Because everyone understood. The search had finally become real. Not grief, not speculation, a search. Then another voice interrupted. "You're already too late." Every wolf turned. The chamber doors stood open. An old woman entered slowly, thin, exhausted, terrified. The moment Mira saw her, everything stopped. Ilara, the healer, lowered her eyes, because some guilt never fades. Not even after 3 years. No one spoke for several moments. The woman who delivered Aaron, the woman who vanished, the woman who carried answers. She stood only a few feet away, yet felt impossibly distant. Then Mira asked the question. The only question that mattered, was he alive? Ilara immediately began crying. Not dramatic tears, not theatrical tears. The exhausted tears of someone carrying a burden for too long. Then she nodded. Once, the room froze, because hearing it from the healer changed everything. The letters suggested it. Ilara confirmed it. Aaron lived, at least on the night everyone believed he died. Then Mira whispered, "Tell me." The healer closed her eyes, and finally, after 3 years, the truth began. The baby cried. Silence. I heard him. Another pause. I held him. The room felt smaller, heavier. Then Ilara continued. He was healthy. Mira gripped the table. Hard. Because those words stole 3 years from her all over again. Then the healer looked toward Rowan. The alpha remained perfectly still. Too still. Dangerously still. Then she whispered, "You left the room." The king nodded. He remembered. The labor nearly killed Mira. The healers asked him to step outside, only for a few minutes. Only until they stabilized her. Then Ilara continued. Damon entered. Silence. Every wolf in the room stared. Then the healer lowered her gaze. He wasn't alone. The statement caught everyone off guard. "What do you mean?" Varric asked. The old woman swallowed, then answered, "There was another man." Silence. A stranger. Another. He wore a hood. The room remained still. Then Ilara whispered, "He knew the child's name." A chill spread through the chamber, because nobody should have known the name. Nobody. Then Rowan asked quietly, "What happened next?" The healer's face went pale. The memory clearly haunted her. Then she answered, "Damon took the baby." No one moved. No one breathed. Then came the sentence that changed the story. He said it was the only way to keep him alive. Silence. Because suddenly Damon wasn't acting for power. At least not entirely. There was something else. Something bigger. Something nobody understood. Hours later, Damon Blackthorne sat alone inside his chamber. No wine. No servants. No distractions. Only memories. The prince stared at the fire, watching flames consume wood. Watching the past consume him. Then the door opened. He didn't need to look up. Only one person entered without permission. Rowan. The room immediately changed. The temperature seemed to drop. The air seemed heavier. The Alpha closed the door behind him, silently, then stood across the room. Neither spoke, because some conversations take years to begin. Then Rowan finally asked, "Did he cry?" Damon froze. Of all the questions, he hadn't expected that one. Then the prince whispered, "Yes." The king closed his eyes. The answer hurt, because for 3 years he imagined silence, death, loss. Now he imagined a cry, a living child, a son. Then Rowan asked another question. "Did you hold him?" Silence. Damon nodded. "Once." The Alpha looked away. Then came the final question. The question Damon feared most. Then finally, he told the truth. "Because I thought he would die if he stayed." The room fell silent. Then Damon looked up. For the first time in years, no lies, no excuses, no manipulation, only regret. The man in the birthing room knew things. A pause. He knew about the mark. Another. He knew about the prophecy. The prince swallowed, then whispered, "He knew about the hunters." Rowan's eyes narrowed, because that word mattered. Hunters, not enemies, not assassins, hunters, people searching. Then Damon continued, "He told me wolves were already coming." The king remained silent, listening. Then the prince said the sentence that had haunted him for 3 years. He said Aaron would never survive Blackthorne. The fire crackled. Neither moved. Then Rowan quietly answered, "You should have trusted me." The words landed harder than any accusation, because they were true. Then Damon lowered his head, because he had no defense left. Far beyond Blackthorne borders, a young wolf stood atop a cliff overlooking Shadowpine Valley. 17 years old in appearance. Tall, lean, silver eyes, dark hair moving in the wind. A strange crescent mark hidden beneath his collar. The young wolf stared toward the western horizon, toward a kingdom he had never seen, toward parents he never knew existed. Then he touched the silver charm hanging around his neck, the only thing left with him as a child, the only clue to his past. For years he ignored it. For years he stopped asking questions. Then the dreams started. The woman, the blanket, the crying, the voice, always calling him somewhere, always pulling him west. Then an older warrior approached, scarred, broad-shouldered, protective, the man who raised him, Garin. The older wolf looked toward the horizon, then quietly said, "It's happening again." The young wolf nodded. The dreams, the pull, the feeling, stronger every day. Then Aaron asked the question he'd asked 100 times. "Who am I?" Silence. The older wolf looked away, because the answer was finally running out of time. And somewhere in Blackthorne Kingdom, the search for a lost son had begun, while the lost son himself was already being pulled toward home. For 3 years, Aaron had lived with questions. Now, the questions were living with him. The valley below Shadowpine shimmered beneath moonlight. Aaron remained on the cliff long after Garon left. The wind tugged at his cloak. The silver charm rested against his chest, cold, familiar, mysterious. His earliest memory wasn't a face, or a voice, or a place. It was the charm. The tiny silver wolf had always been there, around his neck, inside his hand, beneath his pillow, the only object that belonged to him before Garin found him, or so he believed. Then the dream returned, without warning, without sleep, without mercy. A flash, a room, warm firelight, a woman holding a blue blanket, dark hair, silver-gray eyes, tears on her cheeks. Then another image, a large hand resting against a pregnant stomach, a man's voice laughing. The sound felt strangely familiar. Then the vision vanished. Aaron staggered slightly. His breathing quickened, because the dreams were changing, growing clearer, growing stronger, almost like memories. Then footsteps approached. Garin returned. The older warrior carried something wrapped in cloth. His expression troubled, uneasy, as though he had spent hours arguing with himself. Finally, he sat beside Aaron. Neither spoke. The silence stretched. Then Garin handed him the package. "What is it?" The scarred warrior looked toward the horizon, then answered, "Something I should have given you years ago." Aaron frowned. Slowly he unfolded the cloth. Inside rested a tiny blue baby blanket. The world stopped, because he'd seen it before, not physically, in dreams. The exact same blanket, the exact same silver wolf stitched into one corner. His hands immediately began shaking. "Where did you get this?" Garin closed his eyes. The question hurt. Then he answered, "It came with you." Silence. The valley disappeared. The stars disappeared. Everything disappeared. Only the blanket remained. Then Aaron whispered, "Who am I?" The older wolf looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Then quietly said, "A boy who deserves the truth." The answer wasn't enough, not anymore, and Garin knew it. Back in Blackthorn, the investigation consumed the kingdom. The letters revealed enough to create questions, not enough to answer them. Every road leading east was searched. Every old record examined, every witness questioned. Then another breakthrough arrived. A servant discovered a ledger hidden inside an abandoned archive room. Dust covered the cover. Age covered the pages. Yet one entry remained perfectly readable. A payment, large, unusual, made 3 years ago. The recipient's name had been partially scratched away. Yet enough remained. Garin. The name meant nothing to Rowan, nothing to Mira, nothing to Varric. Yet the date changed everything. The payment happened 2 days after Aaron's birth. Silence filled the council chamber. Then Elias asked, "Who is Garin?" But nobody answered, because nobody knew. Then Rowan stared at the ledger, at the payment, at the date, and suddenly realized something. Someone had planned Aaron's disappearance. This wasn't panic. This wasn't desperation. Money changed hands. Instructions were given. Routes were prepared. The theft had been organized. The realization made the king feel sick. Then Mira quietly asked, "Do we know where he went?" Varric pointed toward a map. A single region remained connected to every clue, every letter, every witness, every trail. Shadowpine. The same territory appearing again and again. Then Rowan stood. Decision made. No debate. No hesitation. We ride. That same night, Damon stood alone in the royal cemetery. Rain fell softly. The graves stretched endlessly through darkness. The prince stopped before a small stone marker. The official grave. The lie. The grave everyone believed belonged to Aaron. 3 years. 3 years he'd visited this place. 3 years he'd stood here pretending the child beneath the stone existed. Then Damon laughed bitterly, because the grave was empty, always had been. The prince knelt. Rain soaked his clothes, his hair, his skin, yet he remained there. Then a voice emerged behind him. "You finally look guilty." Damon froze. Slowly he turned. The moonseer stood beneath the rain, motionless, ancient, watching. The prince immediately rose. Anger replaced surprise. "You," the old prophet smiled faintly. "Me." Silence. Then Damon took a step forward. 3 years. Another. 3 years I carried this. Another. Because of you. The moonseer remained calm, unmoved, then quietly answered, "No." The rain continued falling. The old wolf's silver eyes locked onto Damon's. "You carried it because of your choice." The words landed hard, because they were true. The prophet warned him. The prophet frightened him. The prophet manipulated him. Yet Damon made the decision. Then the moonseer looked toward the distant castle, toward Mira, toward Rowan, toward destiny, and softly asked, "Do you know what the worst part is?" Silence. Damon didn't answer. Then the old wolf did. "You were wrong." The prince felt the air leave his lungs, because that was the truth he feared most. Not that Aaron lived, not that the lie failed, that none of it had been necessary. Then the moonseer turned to leave. The prince immediately called after him. "What happens now?" The old prophet stopped. The rain dripped from his cloak. Then he whispered, "The boy comes home." A pause, and everything changes. 3 days later, the riders reached Shadowpine. Mira felt it first. The moment they crossed the border, a strange sensation. Warm, familiar, impossible. The feeling nearly brought tears to her eyes. Then Rowan looked toward her and immediately knew, because he felt it too. The closer they traveled, the stronger it became. Not hope, not instinct. Connection. Something pulling, something guiding. Then Varric rode forward. The captain pointed toward a distant settlement nestled between mountains. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lights glowed in windows. Life, normal life. Then the old warrior spoke. "That's where the trail ends." Silence followed. Because endings are dangerous, especially when they lead to answers. Mira's heart pounded. Her hands trembled. 3 years of grief. 3 years of searching. 3 years of wondering. And somewhere beyond those rooftops, a young wolf with silver eyes was living a life that should have been theirs, unaware that his parents had finally found the road leading home. Shadowpine looked nothing like Blackthorn. The mountains stood taller. The roads felt narrower. The villages felt quieter. Everything seemed untouched by royal politics, untouched by kingdoms, untouched by the grief that had consumed Mira's life. Yet somewhere inside this territory, her son had grown up. The realization made every breath harder. Then the group entered the village. No royal banners announced their arrival. No soldiers marched ahead. Rowan wanted answers, not attention. "If you made it this far, thank you for spending your time with us. Ava's journey is far from finished." In Part 2, new secrets will emerge, old enemies will return, and choices made today will change the future of Ironfang forever. You won't want to miss what happens next. So make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because Part 2 is coming soon. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment from this story?